Hi everybody, this is Jessica Richardson, the National Register Coordinator here with your sort of orientation for the new review committee members. I'm just going to try and explain your role as well as what you should be looking for when you are reading National Register nominations. This is a quote from the National Park Service's Manual for State Historic Preservation Review Boards. The main gist that you want to look at is what's in bold, and you are to determine and evaluate whether the registration form that you read demonstrates that the property or the resource district, whatever you're looking at, meets the National Register criteria for evaluation. So that's your main goal when you're looking at upcoming National Register nominations. Here's the format of a nomination. It'll include the document on the right, that is NPS Form 10900, and sometimes you'll have continuation sheets that look very similar, and you'll see those sometimes. All nominations will include photographs with them, and all nominations will include maps, including a topo map. Now we use Google Maps and ArcGIS maps, and also photo keys to go with those photos. Properties or resources have different levels of significance, starting with national, so things like Civil War battle sites, Mount Vernon, things like that are national levels of significance. State levels of significance include state capitals and other buildings that are important statewide. And then local significance, which the majority of National Register nominations are nominated at the local level. So things such as a town founder's house, the parish courthouse, and other resources like that. There are 4 criteria for evaluation. You'll get very familiar with these. Criteria A is associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. So we normally just say criterion A for history. Criterion B, association with the levels of persons significant in the past. So B is associated with people. C, embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master or possess high artistic values. This is architecture. And the last one is D, which is archaeology, and it discusses resources that have yielded or may be likely to yield information important in prehistory or history. So those are your 4 criteria. There are 5 classes of properties that can be nominated: buildings, districts, sites, structures, and objects. Buildings is anything built to shelter human activity. Districts obviously are concentrations of sites, buildings, structures, or objects. A site is the location of a significant event, such as a battlefield, a shipwreck, a village site for Native Americans. A structure is distinguished from a building in that it is a functional construction made for reasons other than sheltering humans. So things such as bandstands, bridges, lighthouses, things like that. And an object is a construction that is primarily artistic in nature: a fountain, a monument, a statue. There are 3 types of nominations you could see. Most often we see individual listings. You'll also see historic districts. We have 2 historic districts on the July agenda. And then multiple property documentation forms, which we are just starting to use more of, and you'll see one of those on the July agenda for USHA-funded public housing. Nominations are formulaic in nature, which means they follow the same format on every one of them, and generally you can make the same sort of outline for all nominations. They start with filling in blanks with answers that you can get directly from National Park Service bulletins. And then Section 7 and 8 both begin with summary statements. Section 7 is all about an architectural description, and Section 8 is all about significance. So they both start with a summary, and then the body of each section supports those conclusions. So Section 7 will include building elevation descriptions, beginning with the facade and moving all around the building, and Section 8 will set up a context for the significance. The National Park Service requires minimum standards, so it doesn't require dissertation level research, but you do need to cite where you get all of your information from. There are 7 criteria considerations. These types of properties are normally not eligible for listing, but there are loopholes for all of them. So under A, religious buildings are generally not eligible. However, if they are architecturally significant or important in the history of the church itself, they can be nominated. Moved buildings are generally not eligible, but if they've left history behind, they can be eligible. Birthplaces and graves are generally not eligible because being born or dying are not significant events, but if it is the only place left that represents a person, they can be nominated. Cemeteries are normally not eligible. However, if they have design features and architectural significance, as well as people of transcendent importance, they can. Reconstructed buildings are normally not eligible, and only when they're accurately reconstructed or put in a suitable environment can they be nominated. Commemorative properties are normally not eligible, except if they demonstrate how important a society commemorates something versus the event itself. Recently, we had a Confederate memorial nominated, not because it was commemorating the Civil War, but because it was of artistic value. And lastly, normally buildings that are less than 50 years old are not eligible for listing. However, if they show exceptional significance, they are. Like I said, generally resources that are less than 50 years old are not considered historic. However, if it has exceptional significance, it can be nominated. And so what does exceptional mean? Well, an example is the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, where men first traveled to the moon. Something like that, where it has very exceptional significance, is eligible. For a resource to be considered eligible for a listing, they must have two things: significance and integrity. The two questions you want to ask yourself is, why is the resource significant, and so what? Why is that even important? As I stated earlier, Section 7 will be your architectural descriptions, and that'll help cover integrity. And Section 8 will discuss the resource's significance. Integrity can directly reflect the property's significance, and the property's significance can be seen in the integrity that is remaining. So these go hand in hand. As we talked about earlier, significance will cover those criterion. So architecture and engineering will be under C. History, either for an event, will be under A, or with a person, will be under B. And archaeology will be under criterion D. There are many, many areas of significance, including engineering, education, social history, and these are all defined in a National Park Service bulletin, so you have to pick from those specific categories. So what you see on the nomination will be from a National Park Service bulletin. Significance is always set up within a context. There are historic events, architectural styles, and resources and properties that illustrate them do not occur in a vacuum, but rather are part of larger trends or patterns. Those patterns, themes, or trends are called historic contexts, and they help us understand the significance of a property and where it stands within that context. When we talk about context, there's actually two different kinds of context. We have the ones I just mentioned that help set up the significance. And then we also have the context with which the property is located. So the actual physical location, its parish, its city, its state. The historic contexts have been developed. There's nationwide ones, and then Louisiana has also developed its own. And these are just a few examples, including French Creole architecture, log architecture, the Southwest Louisiana rice boom, and the African American experience in Louisiana. We work on developing these whenever there's grant money available and things like that. And so, for example, if you were using the education in Louisiana one and you were nominating a school, you could pull a lot of information from the education in the Louisiana context to help you show why this school is significant in Louisiana's educational history, rather than reinventing the wheel. It's already been done for you. Integrity is the other half of that two-part problem that you want each nomination to show. And integrity is the ability of a property to convey its significance. A property must retain the majority of its historic characteristics, appearance, and setting. And integrity is grounded in an understanding of a property's physical features and how they relate to its significance. So for example, in this picture on the left, this is a clubhouse for a hunting club. And you want to think about it as if the members of this clubhouse, if they came back, would they recognize this clubhouse as their own? And generally they probably would. They might notice that the porch is missing or something like that, but overall they would recognize this clubhouse. Same thing goes for the gym on the right. Would the students who went here to this school recognize this as their gym, or would they not? There are 7 aspects of integrity: location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. You do not have to have all 7 for a property to be eligible, but it must possess several, if not most, of the aspects of integrity in order to convey its significance. Determining which of the aspects of integrity are most important to a particular resource requires understanding why, when, and where a resource is significant. Location is the place where a historic property was constructed or where a historic event occurred. So in this example, this house was built between 1769 and 1820, and it has not been moved from its original location. Thus, it has integrity of location. Setting is the physical environment of a property. Here we have another plantation, later in the 20th century plantation, but in the picture on the bottom left, you can see it was formerly surrounded by a lot of trees. It looks like to be a park, as well as its front drive. And then in the photo from 2009, you can see that there's been a lot of development all around this property. Sometimes this can affect the integrity of setting. Design. Design is the combination of elements that create the form, plan, space, structure, and style of a property. So here we have a building constructed in 1925 with the original plans in the bottom right, and you can see, based on the photograph, the original design, even the portrait, is still intact. Materials. Materials are the physical elements used at a particular time and in a particular pattern to form a historic property. This plantation house has got vinyl siding, replacement windows, and a replacement porch that are affecting the integrity of materials. Sometimes you can do remedial work to bring a building back to a more historic look. Materials is a harder area to bring back original materials because you generally don't still have them. But you can at least help influence materials and integrity as well as design by removing some of these later elements and maybe putting back wood siding or putting back the original porch. Workmanship is the physical evidence of the crafts of a particular period or particular culture or people during any given period in history or prehistory. So in this example, workmanship is shown in the detail of the stained glass done by the artist who created it. Feeling is a property's expression of the aesthetic or historic sense of a particular period. Here we have a Rosenwald High School, and you'd want to, can you still tell this historic building? Does it feel like a historic building? And based on this interior photos, it certainly looks like it has integrity of feeling. Lastly, we have association. Association is the direct link between an important historic event or person and a historic property. This aspect of integrity is especially important with any resources under criterion A or B, as you would want them to reflect the property at the time of the association with either the event or the person. Condition and integrity. Does condition play a role in integrity? From that manual written by MPS, the review board evaluates a resource specifically in terms of the criteria and the historic context within which the property is significant. Again, your main role is to determine if the properties meet the criteria. So just really conditions should not play a role in the determination. Integrity and condition are not the same. Here we have a house that's got high integrity of materials, design, and workmanship, but it's not in the best condition. However, we also know that condition can be reversed. Here we have a house that's been rehabbed to almost, perfect condition, but previously it did not look as good. Alterations can also cause a loss of integrity. So when you're looking at a property that may have had some alterations, you want to think what the bottom line is. How much impact have the alterations had to the resource overall? Do the alterations made make it to where the significance of the building is no longer visible? Again, a good way to think of it, especially if it's a historical association with either people or an event, is to think about what would the people who use this property think? Would they come back and recognize it automatically, or would they not quite be sure? So there are 5 quick steps you can kind of use when you're evaluating integrity. The first is to figure out what's the significance, which the nomination will tell you. What's the period of significance, and what is the applicable eligibility criteria? The why, when, and where. The second step is to identify character-defining features. What features must the property have to convey its significance? So let's say this building here is architecturally significant in its context, in its city. What would be important architecturally for it to retain to convey that significance? Well, I'd say probably the fish scale shingles, the window and door sizes, some of the multi-pane windows, the wood siding. If all of those things were replaced, you wouldn't have the integrity. However, say they just had window replacements, it probably would still retain integrity because it had those other items left. Step 3 is to determine whether the essential physical features are still visible. So on this building, it looks like they might have had some brick collapse or some plaster loss, but the majority of it's still there. Do you still look at that building and can you still see the essential physical features? I'd say probably yes. Step 4, determine which of the 7 aspects of integrity are particularly vital to the property's eligibility, and if they are present. If this particular building were significant under C, architecture, do enough of elements remain to show that significance? Does the setting change have a big impact on it? It probably has some impact, but not as much as the integrity of materials, design, and workmanship were if it were eligible under architecture. Conversely, if it were associated with a famous person, what features are important? What features would have been on the house while that person lived there? Are they present? Would he come back and still recognize this as his house? Step 5, make your final determination with a concise explanation of the reasons that the property retains. So this will all be done in Section 7. You'll have an architectural description, and at the end, they'll discuss every aspect of integrity, and they'll make a final determination as to why it does retain integrity. In addition to individual nominations, you'll also see historic district nominations, and like I said before, a district is a place that possesses a concentration of sites, buildings, structures, or objects. There's 4 types of historic districts: commercial districts, industrial districts, residential districts, and rural districts. One of the nominations, 2 of the nominations are actually historic districts. One's an update that you'll see in July. The update is mostly commercial buildings. The new historic district is mostly residential buildings with some commercial buildings thrown in. When you're looking at the criteria as related to historic districts, it's a little different, and you'll want to look at, do the majority of the buildings illustrate the significance for the district's listing, so whether that's architecture or history related to its development. Do the majority of the buildings have integrity? And are the majority of the buildings over 50 years old? Generally, a period of significance for a district will end 50 years from when the nomination was written, as long as there's justification for this. So as long as the district shows continued growth up through that time. Others will end sooner based on when the district stopped developing. So for example, Edgewood Park ends in 1963 because there's a clear end to development when the interstate came through that year. Historic district boundaries, when you're looking at these in a nomination, you'll just want to look at the justification as well and see that it is a definable geographic area that can be distinguished from surrounding properties by changes such as, a lot of parking lots, new construction, just definable differences between the district and the other. In each district, you will have contributing and non-contributing resources. Not every resource within the boundaries is on the register. So those that are contributing are listed. Those are non-contributing are not listed. Contributing elements are resources of the appropriate age and integrity that illustrate the significance. And conversely, a non-contributing element is not of the appropriate age or lacks integrity. So for example, if our period of significance went through 64 and you had buildings built in the 80s, generally these will be non-contributing elements. Or if you had a building built in the 30s that was severely altered, this would also be non-contributing. Here's an example of a few buildings in downtown Baton Rouge in a historic district. The two buildings with the greenish yellow arrows are contributing resources. They were built within the period of significance and they retain historic integrity. The two in the middle are newer construction from the 70s and 80s and do not contribute to the district. One issue that does sometimes come up is owner objection to listing on the National Register. Owner consent is required. However, owner consent is not required to nominate a property, so a nomination can be written. However, they are then notified when it will be nominated, and they can, at that point, object. In a district, 51% of the owners must send a notarized letter of objection to actually stop the listing. And what happens in that case is we send the nomination on to the National Park Service, and instead of checking that it's a nomination, we check that it is determined eligible. And that way, should a future property owner change their mind, or any subsequent owners want to be listed, the objection can be withdrawn. So now I'm going to just talk about what to expect at your first National Register Review Committee meeting. Here's an example of an agenda. We have, you'll see that we will follow Robert's Rules of Order, as well as Louisiana Open Meetings laws. And I've included links at the end of this if you wanted to check those out. The meeting starts with a call to order by the chairperson, who we elect at each spring meeting. You all approve the agenda for the current meeting, and usually either our division director, our deputy SHPO, or our SHPO will do some sort of introduction. I then normally introduce each member, and the committee then approves the minutes from the previous meeting. Again, using Robert's Rules of Order, the chairperson will ask for a motion. The motion will be made and seconded, and then votes are taken. Once this is all taken care of, new business happens. The nominations are presented usually by the person who prepared it. Sometimes this is the property owner. Most of the time this is a consultant. They're each given 5 to 10 minutes to present. For historic district nominations, we'll give them up to 15 minutes because it's more information to present. I do try to strictly enforce time, as we have committee members and presenters coming from all over the state who have long drives ahead of them to get home. After each person has presented the basics of the nomination with photographs, there's time for the committee to ask questions. The chairperson also asks if members of the audience would like to speak in support, or maybe even have questions about the property. And sometimes we even have people who can add some information, which is good. After there's no more discussion on each nomination, a motion is made to approve or not approve each nomination. Votes are taken, and you move on to the next one. Depending on the length of the agenda, we usually take a 10-minute break halfway through. You'll see that on this example. At July's meeting, we have 6 nominations, and we will take a break halfway through because there are 2 districts. Following the last nomination, I make any additional announcements that need to be made, and then the chairperson adjourns the meeting. We aim to keep the meetings at about 1.5 to 2 hours at most. We've had them go longer before, just depending on the nominations, if there's a lot of discussion, but generally 2 hours is the length of the whole meeting. Here's some helpful links that I mentioned. We have the Robert's Rules of Order, where you can kind of review how we run the meetings, and if you've been a part of any sort of committee, you'll be familiar with this. a link to Louisiana's open meetings laws, and then a link to the MPS manual for state review boards. They don't print this anymore, but it is available online if you wanted to review it. So that's really basically the basics of serving on the review committee and what your official role is, and kind of what you should look for when you're looking over the nominations I sent you all last week. I'm here to assist you, so feel free to contact me by email or phone, and I am more than ready to help you with any questions you may have. See you all July 24th.